Have you ever looked at certain people and just wondered, how do they do it? How do they seem to effortlessly create, influence, and just win? Well, today, we're not just telling a life story. We're going to deconstruct a really powerful playbook for exactly that. We're cracking open what you could call the Scott Adams operating system. It really all starts with this one big question. How do these wildly influential people actually think? Is there some kind of underlying logic, a mental model that we can borrow and, apply to our own lives? Okay, let's just dive right in. Here's the core idea, and it's a big one. Forget the life story. The day-to-day biography, the real gold, the secret sauce is in the operating system, that invisible mental machinery that's powering all their decisions, their learning, and their creations. So where do we even begin with an OS like this? Well, we start with the absolute foundation. Let's call it the Scott Adams OS, and its core code, it's all about mindset. And the very first piece of that code is pretty radical. Adams famously said, goals are for losers, systems are for winners. Now, that is designed to grab your attention, for sure. But what does it actually mean in practice? This slide here breaks it down perfectly. A goal, that's a temporary achievement. It's a finish line you cross one time, and then you're done. But a system, that's a recurring process. It's like a machine you build that produces outcomes day after day after day. So instead of aiming to write a book, the system is to write 500 words every morning. It's a really profound shift in thinking. And that, of course, leads to the next big question for all of us, right? If systems are the answer, how do you actually design one for yourself? The next part of the OS gives us a clue. It's another one of these fundamental shifts in how we look at the world. Instead of asking, is this information true? The system asks, is this persuasive? I mean, this completely flips the script. You're moving from just simple fact-checking to analyzing the very mechanics of influence itself. And this is basically the toolbox for that analysis. The system is constantly scanning for things like framing, setting the context to control how an issue is seen, or anchoring, planting that first piece of information to influence all the judgments that come after. It treats public conversation not as a debate over truth, but as a competition of these powerful psychological levers. So, okay, let's say you have a system and you understand persuasion. How would you become uniquely valuable? Well, the answer lies in the power of what he calls the talent stack. Adams always argued he wasn't the world's best artist or the best writer. But look at this stack. He was above average at drawing, plus above average at writing, plus he had a pretty good sense for business, and then you add an obsession with persuasion. Individually, they're just good skills. But you combine them? That specific combination is incredibly rare and super powerful. Think about it in other fields. A coder who's also a great public speaker, or a scientist who's brilliant at marketing. It's the stack that creates the magic. Now that we've got the core mindset down, let's see how this OS builds on itself. I mean, any great operating system needs to constantly improve, right? And that brings us to the next section, learning. Or we could call it the update engine. And the learning method here is just as counterintuitive as everything else. The main directive isn't to go out and memorize a bunch of facts. No, it's to collect patterns, to look for recurring human behaviors, predictable reactions, things that happen over and over. You're not just studying information, you're studying people. A key tool for this is something called reframing. It's basically the skill of changing a concept's emotional context to gain power over it. It's about consciously changing the story you're telling yourself to change your emotional state. It's a total game changer. And here are some perfect practical examples. So a project didn't work out, that's not a failure. You reframe it as data. You don't have one single world-class talent, you reframe that as skill stocking. You're not just chasing goals, you're building systems. Do you see how each of these reframes shifts you from a position of maybe weakness to one of incredible power? Okay, so we have the mindset and we have the learning engine. But how does this OS actually run, day to day? That brings us to habits, or what we can think of as the daily algorithm. Here's another huge distinction. Most of us are taught to manage our time, our hours. But this system prioritizes managing energy. It's not about working until you're completely exhausted. It's about protecting your brain fuel, your cognitive clarity, like it's your most important asset. Because it is. And that energy management is what makes these core disciplines possible. You notice a theme here. They're all about creating leverage. First, protect your first 90 minutes for pure creative output. No email, no news, just focus. Second, ship daily. It's not about being perfect, it's about building a habit of production. Third, simplify complex ideas into memorable hooks. This forces you to be clear and it makes your ideas stick. And finally, and this is a big one, label yourself with the identity you want. You want to be a writer, you call yourself a writer. Identity literally drives behavior. So how do we put all of this together into something we can actually use? I mean, that's the crucial point, right? This final section gives us exactly that, your daily playbook. And this slide just illustrates how simple the application can actually be. It all boils down to this 3-part daily system. Step 1, your morning is for creating. No input, only output. Step 2, midday is for consuming, but you're using that persuasion lens, just looking for one pattern. And step 3, your evening is for publicly articulating one insight you had, simplifying it into a powerful hook. That is the machine. And when you run that simple system consistently, it compounds over time, and it creates these incredible results. Which really brings us to the final, and I think the most important question of this whole explainer. What system will you build tomorrow? Because at the end of the day, the most powerful operating system is the one you design for yourself.